Good morning and welcome to everyone. We're new to Berkeley Zen Center. A big welcome to you. How's my sound?
So you might want to speak with a little bit of force. You're a little bit low coming from me, but maybe people want to do their hands up, thumbs up if it sounds good to them.
I can turn up my volume too.
That would be just a tad, please.
How's that? Is that better? Is that okay?
A little bit higher. A little bit higher.
Okay, how's that?
A little bit better. We'll go with that.
Okay, well, I have more volume to go. Okay, here we go. So, as you know, we've been studying, or most of you know, if you've been following along, Dogen's Guidelines for Studying the Way. And today I'm going to talk about number 6. There are 10 guidelines, so we're halfway through. We're also halfway through this practice period, aspects. So I'll do a short review of the first 5 steps that he gives us. The first one is that our mind is seeking the truth, and it has been touched upon, perhaps in a profound way, like a bolt of lightning, or more subtly, like a whisper. But something has been awakened within us, which is called our Bodhi mind. In the second step, we see we do need guidance, and we need training in order to pursue this true law. Third, we realize we need constant practice to attain enlightenment. Constant practice. And fourth, we must recognize that we don't enter practice with the idea of gaining something. We just do it for its own sake, as we say. And fifth, and this was discussed on Thursday night's class, the importance of seeking a true master or teacher. So today, step 6, and this is one of the longer sections, so instead of reading the text, I'm going to pick out a few sentences from this. And what I see is that he's made 5 points here. And in addition, I'm going to bring up some things, how I see we can practice with these in our everyday life. So some of the titles for this section, number 6, I drew from different translations. What you should know for practicing Zen. Another one said, things that should be kept in mind in practicing Zen. Another, it was advice for practicing Zen. Or the last one, the necessity of being aware during Zazen. So the first point that I see Dogen made is, and this is, I'll read the sentence, practicing Zen and learning the way is the most important matter of your whole life. We should never take it lightly, belittle it, or be hasty with it. It is of grave importance. I love that. It just kind of makes me want to cry. The most important matter of your whole life. And Dogen goes on to talk about different masters who made great sacrifices, like cutting their arm off and their finger. They had such deep desire to study with a master. Buddha himself left his wife, his child, his country, a life that was full of luxury where he would be king. And one night, that way-seeking mind must have been so strong that he left. And I myself did the same thing. Surprises me as I think back on that, but I didn't leave in the night. Took a bit of planning. But that inmost request was strong enough that I knew I needed to follow that. And so I let my son be raised by his father. And decisions like this, I'm sure that Buddha must have had to ponder this too, what he was giving up. It takes a lot of thinking about it. For example, I did not have the support of my family. And I think the point is, when we make these choices for practice, sometimes we have to pay a price for that. On the one hand, we gain something. I myself gained the opportunity to pursue my inmost request. And what I gave up was that I did not actively raise my son and get to know him and help him as a mother. Now, Buddha would have had to do the same. With all his teachings, he would have had to make his own amends with his wife and his child. Otherwise, he couldn't have said all those teachings. So, in practice, these things happen. We may have to give up things, realizing this path, to follow this path, but we gain so much. When I told Sojin about that, he said, it was my destiny. So whatever you are doing is your destiny. And under this still first statement, I want to say we do need to make time for practice. Maybe getting up earlier to do our zazen practice, which may require us going to bed earlier. Sometimes we have to reevaluate our friendships to see if they're supporting us through this practice. Maybe even having to give up a friendship. Or looking at our eating and drinking habits, if they're supporting this constant practice. And then there's making time for Dharma talks, making time for a class, or a one-day sitting, or a 3 or 4 or 5 day sitting. And this practice goes, maybe want to give back by offering something to the temple, volunteering a position, so your whole life can really shift in this practice. But we were fortunate as Dogen that he was in a community. He lived with his monks, Sangha. The benefits is the Sangha, the community, the connections that we get from this practice. So I imagine that you've all had to give up something to be here. And we don't take that lightly. Your life has probably changed in fruitful ways because of that. Sorry about the rustling of these papers. So the second point that Dogen makes is, and I'll read his sentence, people of the present say you should practice what is easy to practice. These words are quite mistaken and not in accord with the Buddha way. And he points out that not only he is saying this, but many previous ancestors had talked about how difficult it is. I think we hear that from teachers today. You may say that yourself. It is difficult. And sometimes Dogen makes this case that if you have an easy practice, it would become tiresome. So I have to say sometimes my practice does feel mundane. There's kind of a laziness or sloth that sets in. I'm doing the practice, I'm sitting, I'm doing the things, but there's kind of a maybe dullness or just a little laziness, not quite as crisp as it could be, which is why I appreciate a practice period, because it does bring up what I want to talk about. This is not what Dogen talked about here, but I imagine he did talk about it at some point, which is one of the paramitas called virya, which is translated as diligence, constancy. I like to call it vigor. Vigor. In all of our practice, we do need to kind of raise up our energy. But to raise up that energy, sometimes I have to look at what I'll call leaking energy. Where are we leaking that energy? So, for example, frittering time on unimportant things. I often like to ask myself, what is the most important thing? Because now, especially, think of all the demands that are put on you. Work, family, culture, society. It's all calling you. Come here, come here, come here. And you have to really look and see where do I want to be spending my time? What do I want to be doing? Another way to leak energy might be putting things off I need to do, procrastinating. Because it never really leaves you. It's there, got to do it, but just leaks that energy. It takes energy to do that. Or maybe talking too much. In the precepts, it's called haphazard talk. Just spinning wheels talking. And it is a culture that does a lot of talking. It's just what we do. Or maybe I have having worrying or obsessive thoughts, fantasies. So it's really leaking our energy, bringing us down. And then we might be blocking energy, which sometimes eating or drinking too much, you can feel it in the body. Or there could be still unconscious emotional blockage for things we just really haven't examined in our life. Maybe from childhood even. And you can feel them, they're like in your body. Or our fixed ideas and our opinions, points of view. So we hold on to those and have that rigidity. And we can't let go of them. Or even carrying resentments. Think of this person, and I still have some resentment, and I just feel it in my body when I think of him. So I have to think about that and study it and see how I can shift that. Pessimism brings you down too, blocks that energy, or jealousy. And even when we have self-doubt, and our desire to control. Or maybe when I compare myself to others, we can feel all these things in our body. And they have to be really examined and studied so those blocks can be removed so we can then have some vigor and energy for our continuous practice. And these paramitas are very old. I really like them and draw upon them. And of course, Dogen would have been familiar because they were in the Pali Canon. They were very early teachings of Buddha. So Sojin once said that you have to have a real affinity for this practice. He would say, he saw a lot of people come through the doors, our doors at the Zendo, but did not return because you just have to be drawn to it. We've talked about now how difficult it is. And so it has to resonate with you, not being an easy practice. And Buddha himself had a lot of austere practices. He said, I will carry austerity to the uttermost. This is the way to acquire wisdom. So he did a lot of practicing with fasting. At one point, he had 1 grain of rice a day. And then at another point, he had nothing at all. These are practices, I think the yogis did very austere practices. He even practiced holding his breath while in deep meditation. And yet with all that self-mortification, he did not attain enlightenment. So that is not the practice that we do or recommend. It's not the way to know your true self. So the third point Dogen is making now is that anyone can practice Zen. And I love this point too. Young, I know we have very young practitioners now here. They could be not older than 5 or 6 years old. They're sitting with their parents. And that's all going in their consciousness. You're never too young to start. And very old, or older. I myself didn't start practice till I was in my mid-50s. So you just enter wherever you are. And Dogen says, this practice doesn't distinguish whether you're very bright, highly educated, and intellectual, or you're average, or perhaps you have no education. He brings up the example of Wei Ning, who was our 6th patriarch. Brilliant mind in the Dharma. He was illiterate. He never learned to write or read. And luckily, his followers wrote down his words, which are in the Platform Sutra. So we don't enter this practice or gain enlightenment through our intellect. And it doesn't matter how you sit. I think that is sometimes maybe off-putting for people. Oh, I'm going to have to sit on the cushion, full lotus, half lotus. I can't do that. No problem. You sit what you can do. Could be in a chair. Could be lying down. At our Zendo, we accommodate all of that. So no one is excluded. Even if you have another practice, and many people do, they may have another spiritual, religious, Christian practice, for example, or a Jewish practice. They just dovetail together. So anyone can practice Zen. You simply enter wherever you are. And the next point Dogen makes is to understand Dharma and attain the way can only be the result of studying with a teacher. Now, on Thursday, in the previous step, we talked about finding a true teacher. But my understanding here is that Dogen is focusing on the student. And basically, he's talking about getting ourselves out of the way. So a student might come and see a teacher and see, well, do they think the way I think? So you're trying to see if this is the teacher for you by his understanding, and does that match your understanding? So in other words, we're not coming with that beginner's mind because we already have some idea of what we're looking for. And sometimes this can be a little dangerous to a student that has a lot of knowledge, done a lot of studying. This can be a pitfall or hindrance for, I think I told the story in the first class about a monk called Kyogen. This is my koan, so I know you might be familiar with it, that heard it. But he was so bright. He was just brilliant, really. And a big, massive man in addition. He memorized all the sutras. He lived during the Song dynasty. Had them all memorized. And he could go against anyone. Dharma combat. He knew everything. But his teacher was not sure whether he really had taken, had a deeper understanding of what the teachings were. And he asked him a question. It wasn't a question regarding the sutras. It was to draw upon something else. For example, why did Bodhidharma come to the West? Well, that's not something you're going to find in the sutras. And he was bereft that he did not know the answer to this. In fact, he ended up burning all his sutras and left the monastery and went to live in the mountains by himself and just had to let go of everything that was in that brain. All those ideas had just come down to just this, really, just what was right in front of him. And that is how, after I don't know how long, but he did wake up. So, as best we can, we just come with an empty, open mind to this practice. They say in the Sandokai, the chant, don't set up standards of your own. So we don't have to think, we don't want to think about, we don't rely on our thinking mind or how we perceive things or reflect on things. We do that in our daily life. We need to do that. But in this practice, we don't. And we talked a lot on Thursday about trusting and having faith in a teacher's understanding. And I think that's what it takes. You develop that trust and faith in the teacher. And then we can let go. We can let go of our ego and this self-centeredness. It's like a surrendering and turning ourselves over. It's kind of a big thing, but when you really trust someone, you do that. We do that. And I think we really are doing all of this on an intuitive level. We're watching the teacher too. How do they walk? How do they talk? We watched Sojin, didn't we? How he entered the Zendo. How he had his hands in Gasho. How he bowed. He talked. And that tells us a lot about a person. How they move. And how they treat others. How they speak to others. And in turn, the teacher's watching us. Sojin, you would say, I know who you are. And you'd think, well, I've hardly spoken to you at all. How could, he doesn't really know me. But he knew us through our bodies, how we were in the world. And so Dogen was living in this monastery. He was setting up these guidelines. I imagine that they were he was a model for his monks, and I'm sure that some of the guidelines were coming from how his monks were. So this deep trust and faith. My first teacher, I had having some sort of difficulty in communication with someone. She gave me the suggestion. She told me exactly what to do. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I actually left her for a couple months. I just could not see her. And finally, when I returned, we talked about it. And maybe I deepened my understanding of what it was that she wanted me to do and why it would be a benefit. And I was able to do it. So this was really because I grew in my trust and faith in her teaching. So the last point that I see Dogen made was, he says, we can see that breaking bones or crushing marrow is not difficult, but to harmonize the mind is most difficult. So he's talking about that there's really no separation between activity and stillness, harmonizing. Have you ever watched your hands or some part of your body? For example, I watch my hands in the kitchen, and they're just harmonized. They know how to chop, they know how to slice, they know how to sort, they know how to pour water from a pot and then put water back in. They know how to go get the spice. And all this is done kind of in a harmony with my mind. It's just doing. These hands are so marvelous. And they're just in harmony with my whole body. And even if my mind is looking at a recipe and looking at, okay, here's the next ingredient, and then my hands just know how to get that next ingredient into the pot. And my mind is just really following along in this activity. And this is really what we're doing in Zazen. We have this, we sit, however we sit, and there is that stillness in our body, and yet our mind continues to generate thoughts. In the stillness, we're not doing anything with them. Theoretically, we're simply letting them go. So we're just sitting and resting in awareness. So that's what I see as his five points. And so I'm going to summarize it for you, and then I'll ask you for your questions and comments and how you're practicing. So again, the first thing is remembering practicing Zen and learning the way is the most important matter of your whole life, and not to take it lightly. Second, the mind that seeks the way does not search for easy training. The next, anyone, young, old, very smart, average, physically fit, or otherwise, can practice Zen. And fourth, the importance and necessity of letting go of our Buddhist knowledge in order to study with a teacher. And finally, harmonizing the mind is the most important thing, is most important. So I think I'm going to stop there and see if anyone has anything they would like to add or questions or comments. And I guess, Blake, you'll take that part, take care of that.
Certainly. Let's take another run at your microphone, Carol. crank it. And then speak.
There, it's at full volume.
Okay, maybe just move your chair closer to the microphone.
Okay, how's that?
I think that's a little bit better.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope you heard something.
No, I did. I think everybody practiced listening harder, so it was good practice. So,
Well, it's not in the words anyway. Actually, it's not in the words, so it's okay. If you didn't.
If Dogan says so. Could you please raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll call on you. Let me get my head straight. All right, hands, please. Okay, yeah, and so unfortunately, people are going to have to also now that the microphones are higher, lower their microphones so your ears don't get blown. Hands for Q&A, please.
Can we call on Ellen?
Yes, Ellen, please.
Okay, am I blowing your ears out with my microphone? So I was wondering, Carol, if you could talk a little bit about, you talk about harmonizing the mind, but, sometimes the mind isn't harmonized. And, it's sort of like, well, it isn't. So how do you practice with that? I remember once this was when I was Shuso, and I went in to talk to Sojin, and I said, I have spent the entire morning thinking about my talk. I haven't had one moment when I wasn't thinking about my talk, not one. So sometimes it's just like that, I guess. But I just wondered if you had any words about that.
Well, you're not alone.
Oh, good.
You're not alone. I can imagine everyone in this room would say the same thing, that they've had that. Sometimes we just call that busy mind. The busy mind or the planning mind. Or the frantic mind. But in that, I think there, and maybe others can make comments about this, but I think in that, partly just being in that still position, the body is so still. There is something happening, even if the mind is very busy and can't stop. And, it really, for me, maybe really realistically, it stops a second, then it goes back, stops a second. That's why we practice, because we have to keep working with this. But we just have to keep practicing. And coming back, you see yourself doing it, okay, drop for a second, keep coming back. And then I've heard too, sometimes, and this happens to me, after a busy mind session, I get up from sitting, and I do feel a little lighter, a little better. And maybe things have even actually slowed down some.
But sort of, where does the word harmonize come in on that?
Well, that when I described how cooking, sometimes we are just harmonizing our body and mind. We maybe don't recognize it, but we're in harmony. It's like a dance almost. When the mind can slow down enough to recognize that. That's not a very
That's fine.
Better study this a little more.
That's fine. Thank you, Carol.
Would anyone like to comment on that? How they see that?
Please raise your hand and keep it in mind. And keep that in mind. I'm going to go to Ross Blum.
Thank you. I refer to Sojin's technique of looking at the opposite. So if I hear about harmony and not harmonizing, I think about dissonance. And what can I do to harmonize with the dissonance? And that helps me calm my mind and get clarity and some subtleness. So if I fight the dissonance, I become more dissonant, and it's not so pleasant. So, coming back to breath and posture, as Carol said, sitting quietly and accepting the dissonance and the difficulty is a way that brings me some peace of mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. In other words, don't fight it. Just kind of go with that. Yeah. Just knowing there are times of our sitting that are that way.
Joan and Jeff, or Jeff.
Hi, I'm Barbara Joan.
Hi, Barbara.
Thank you for the talk. I like the way you delineated things. That was helpful for me to scaffold it and brought up myriad questions. In reflection, I really could feel what you were saying about your hands, and your hands while you were saying it looked so beautiful. So it drew me to your hands, and I could imagine your hands chopping. And I tend to be that way, to mimic. I have that in that kind of brain. And I was thinking that the way that I feel that way most is dancing. And Ellen, I was thinking of your talk last week and about your dancing and about the bird that you watched. And I was thinking how difficult it is to translate that kinesthetic harmony to stillness, and how much I've struggled with that and against that in my life of intermittently trying to practice. And so, Ross, thank you for that suggestion to practice with what's not working instead of against it. And I think somewhere buried in here is probably a question. I'm not sure I can. It was about talking and over talking, which I tend to do. And then I felt that when I was raising my hand, even like I love being in the conversation, and how do we, how do you think about being in the conversation in silence? I don't know if that's really a clear question, but it's some sort of question. So I'll put it out and see how you take it, or what can we do with that?
Well, I guess I'd see it a little different. I don't know that you need to be silent. In fact, you want it. I think it's important that you express what it is you have to say, but maybe rather seeing how it's said. If you feel like you over talk, maybe it could be said in less words. And then also just looking to see what is it that wants to talk? What is that need? It's not something wrong, but is it adding? Is it adding to the conversation? Is it adding to you, for you? Good.
Thank you.
People used to tell me that, people that really like to talk, go talk to your shower head. You can get all that out. There's nothing wrong with being a talker. Just make sure it's not draining you. Thank you.
Heiko, please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Thank you very much, Blake, and thank you, Carol, for your talk. And thanking Ellen also for her admitting to what we all know so well is that endlessly busy mind that we encounter sometimes on the seat. And harmonizing with that, I'm going to sort of reiterate a little bit of what Ross just said, but we have an opportunity, I think, in sitting to find what quiet mind looks like so that we can distinguish busy mind. And having recognized quiet mind, eventually we can recognize busy mind and we can harmonize with it as it is, rather than thinking this is okay or not okay, good or bad. We can just harmonize with, oh, this is me preparing for a talk, and I can't possibly let it go right now, for example. And we know the difference by virtue of working hard and finally achieving quiet mind. So I'm not sure if that is a question so much, but it is one of the things we gain, or I have gained in practice.
Thank you. No, I think you've said it. Yeah.
Susan Marvin.
Morning, Carol.
Morning, Susan.
Thank you. Two things popped into the mind when Ellen asked her question. One was cooking practice. Like when you add salt to a soup or a spice or seasonings, they harmonize the whole thing. They bring the whole thing together in a way. And if you put too much, if there's too much of a certain taste, it stands out and it ruins it. So that was one thing. And we learned to do that over time, harmonize the soup or even the salad. And the other thing that came to mind was music is kind of like that, like when people sing together or musicians that play together, harmonizing is not letting the all-important me dominate the group, right? And sometimes one voice or one instrument or a group is spotlighted and comes forward and the others hold that. But that's something that takes a lot of work, is harmonizing, and chanting's like that. There's so many things in our practice that are like that. And the mind maybe is like that. I wonder what you think about that. The mind is maybe like that. And we give it a spotlight sometimes if we can't harmonize. We let it be and we recognize it's busy and then we let it go and we come back to what comes next. I don't know. I wonder what you think about that.
It's kind of making me think harmonizing, really just having that be kind of in the forefront. All of life, we want to move through life in harmony with people, with our family, meeting someone, connecting. Am I in harmony? In nature, are we harmonizing? In other words, really not pushing against it, just being open, like Ross was saying. It's the same thing in Zen or Zazen. Opening to whatever's happening, just letting it go, and kind of think of just, yes, how are we harmonizing in our everyday life, in our everyday actions? Am I in harmony? And then, of course, we look at some of those things I talked about, the virya, or are there blocks there that need to be looked at? But isn't there that saying, our everyday life is like a dance? Well, it's like being in harmony. That's what I was thinking. Thank you, Susan.
Philip Sherrard.
Hi, Philip.
Hi. I want to start off by thanking you for the way that you presented your talk, in terms of delineating it in a really cohesive way that was very helpful for me to understand your understanding of how you felt Dogen was presenting it, and it was really very helpful. Thank you. But on to my question. And I'm not sure how to formulate this, except that it has to do with, I wanted to know if you had any way that you could explain to me how you would deal with doubts. I mean, your path seems so difficult from my point of view, thinking about your mind, but being in your mind, there's nothing more fundamental than the relationship of a mother and child. And for you to give that up, I wondered how you dealt with the doubts around that. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
To be able to say, okay, I am not going to be in the life of my child for a period of time at a very young age. I wondered how you did. I mean, besides maybe coming back and talking, I would imagine you would talk to someone like Sojin to bring this up, but instead of me coming up with my ideas of what you might do, I wondered if you could speak to how you would deal with the doubts.
Well, for me, it's been kind of a lifetime koan. There was so much doubt and shame, having chosen this path. So many things I had to work through, and continuously, because it kept coming up.
Right.
And
go away and then come back again. Yeah.
And when my son was 16 and I was doing the 12-step program, I went up to make my amends. So that, and I had also done this other course called the Course of Miracles. So all these little things that I had been doing were helping me with my path. And the making my amends began a new path of how to amend what I had lost and how can we move forward. And so it's a constant practice for me, becoming the mother that I wasn't, being a grandmother to his children, where I was not present for him. I could be there present for his children. And I've often thought, too, would I do it again? Sometimes I hear people doing that, and I think, how could they do it? And then I realize, well, you did it. It's like, oh, right. And I think, would I do it again? And actually, I think so, because my pull was so strong that I would do it again. However, I would be much more of a presence in his life. I would do that part different. Stay connected. Been a force as a mother in a much different way. So sometimes we don't maybe understand why we do certain things, but if, as Soji said, it was my destiny, and I am making amends all the time with it. So it's a lifelong koan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 5 minutes left and a couple more questioners. If we could be concise, that would be great. Linda Hess.
Morning.
Good morning, Linda.
Again, to Ellen's very productive question. I just want to say what my understanding of that is. Now, when the mind is frantic, we do, the fact that that the mind is frantic is already the blessing or the awakened moment. So the second that we notice it, usually I'll have a knee-jerk kind of reaction. This shouldn't be here. My mind should not be frantic. I should let this go. All of that is so unhelpful. It's just automatic. So what I've found most helpful now is if I'm lucky enough to notice that my mind is frantic, or this is painful, I can't stand it, whatever. If I notice it, to say, oh, and to observe it with love and compassion. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much.
Judy Fleischman.
Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, Judy.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate particularly the way that you've brought together vulnerability and a transparency, about your own journey in the context of these teachings, and particularly, this theme that I heard you just say, even to stay connected. And so what I'm wondering about is the power of story. Like, I heard a retelling of the story of the Buddha's awakening that includes his wife Yasudhara, and that they each are on a journey simultaneously, and they awaken together. So you can call it a feminist spin, or you could just call it a recontextualizing of the Dharma with an awareness of the power of story. And, we need each other to do that. So I was just really struck by how you're sharing a personal story of your own journey with that, with your son and how you came to making amends. So my question to you is, how does this connect to what Hozan often is reminding us of, the practice of mutual accountability? And what I'm wondering is, when you came to the recognition that you both had to follow, so to speak, your destiny, and at the same time it had an impact that you needed to make amends for that story, if you will, to be restored, how would you encourage us to do that? Because so often we don't know that unless someone challenges our view or something bubbles up inside and someone can really meet us in that thing. How do you encourage that as a practice, let's say, of mutual accountability, mutual vulnerability, mutual storytelling?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but is there something that you're, let's say, for example, there's something that, let's say one person, you're feeling something's not complete, or it's something that needs to be said or done, or.
Well, it's kind of like the first time I heard that story of the Buddha, and I read it in Siddhartha or whatever, that he left home or whatever. I had enough experience from other contexts to go, oh, mythology. So what's important in this story? How do I enter it? And I need to find somebody or some peoples or something to really see that it's not about the myth. It's about the meaning, and it's about the practice. And, so now in our Sanghas, we're looking at issues of how does our various biases, from racism to patriarchy, all these things that ripple in, and we're all well-intentioned, but they can actually have an impact, and we don't know it until we have the difficult conversations. And this can come up in the cushion, this can come up in the Dharma hall. How do we face that as this life practice in this time, this context? And your story is so powerful to me because it's the Buddha's story with the tension and also the reconciliation. And that's why it really touches me so deeply.
Well, you bring up a lot, and I think we are in a whole new place now in the world. So new to so many of us that we just have to, first educate ourselves about these things. And to learn more about it, and how can we come together, and how can we heal so many things just with personally in ourselves and in this culture. So I don't think there's one specific thing, just a willingness to open and see that there's so many other points of view that we haven't even known, so many other ways people have lived that we don't know about. And we are so many things that are available to find out more. We offer so much at Berkeley Zen Center, and we'll be offering even more to help us along our path. But as we learn these things too, we're looking at our own personal journey. That's what you're asking too. We have our own personal journey, and then there's the societal journey that's going on. And of course, the big thing is staying connected. Really realizing so much the connection that we have with Sangha. As you said, as the Buddha said, right? The most important of the three jewels.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Stephanie, a short question or comment, please.
Carol, I so appreciated your talk.
Hi, Stephanie. God.
So honest and courageous to share, particularly your experiences with your son and deciding to honor your path. I've been reading, this is more of a comment rather than a question. I've been reading Ed Brown's No Recipe.
Oh.
And off and on, I open it up to pages that so last night I opened this up, Being Cracked Open. And as you were talking, or actually Ellen was talking about harmony and your cooking, reading this quote from Suzuki Roshi: when you are cooking, you are not just cooking, you are working on yourself. You are working on others. we keep studying until hindrances become the opportunity for practice. And it made me think of no duality, not being separate from what we're all doing. And I find that when that occurs, I'm in harmony. And that's how that particular quote appealed to me. So thank you again for your talk.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Perfect for what we were talking about.